Lovely day today, isn't it, Thomas?
It certainly is, sir.
Sir? Sir, there's a radio report. It's the news. It seems very important. You should hear this.
Amazing news here today from the Copley Hill radio station. It can be reported that Adolf Hitler is at last dead. This will likely bring about the end of World War II and peace amongst the world.
Wow, this is amazing. Let's celebrate, everyone. George, play us your finest rendition of Der Fuhrer's face.
Wenn der Führer steht, wie ist der Master Race? We heil, heil, right in the Führer's face. Not to love the Führer is a great disgrace, so we heil, heil.
Sudrian Conflict is known as one of the greatest Thomas fan-made series ever. The stories and characters in it are so good that dare I might say that this gives the Brenner era a run for its money in terms of quality. For those of you who don't know or have never watched this series, Sudrian Conflict is a Thomas fan series made by the YouTuber turtlesandthomas. This series discusses about quite a lot of mature themes such as betrayals and such. So much for a kids cartoon, eh? So if you have not seen the series, pause this video and go watch the entirety of it and then come back and watch this. Trust me, you're going to love it. I'll make sure to link the entire series playlist in the description. Also, spoiler warning, so yeah, beware of it if you haven't watched it. So without wasting any further time, let's get into the list. Number 10. The Conflict Begins. The Conflict Begins is essentially a remake of The Adventure Begins, and as that special is my top favorite Thomas special, I naturally love this episode too. The models of LBSC Thomas, Black James look very good and are very well made. This episode also acts as a sort of breather to the main story with its light-hearted tone, before the next episode where things start to get brutal. We also spend a lot of time with Gordon here and start to care for him more, which in turn makes us feel even more sad for his final appearance in Maron Station. Overall, a fantastic remake with its own story elements and plot added to it to make it its own thing. Number 9. Differences. This episode was just great, and the reason for that greatness is Simon. During the first half of Sudrian Conflict, Simon is actually one of my personal favorite characters. In this episode, we get to learn more about him, his backstory, from where did he come, and what goes on in his freaky mind. I also really like how what happened between him and Charles is never actually properly explained, which allows the audience to question it. Whatever is implied though is actually kind of messed up to think about it, and maybe can give some justification for whatever Simon did, and you kind of feel sympathetic for him. What is implied in the episode, however, is that Simon was molested. Never thought I would see these topics associated with Thomas. This episode also has one of the most humorous lines.
I shall not go into any further detail regarding this story as it is not appropriate for children.
Now let us resume the story of the bloodthirsty murdering sociopath with a long history of violence and a small army at his command.
Pretty good. Differences overall is a very good episode and should be praised for how wonderfully it develops a character. Number 8. Inheritance Part 7. Inheritance was sort of the main turning point of the series between the first two seasons and season 4. Part 7 is the final part of this saga, and in my opinion is the greatest part of the Inheritance saga. I loved the scene where Mason was attacking Maron Park, which was sort of a foreshadowing to one of the show's darkest moments later on. This episode also has the moment where Phil gets his very iconic scar on his forehead that he will be stuck with for the rest of the series. The reveal of Stephen Hatt actually being Simon's son was a pretty emotional scene. Many people, including me, thought that this would be the last of Stephen that we would be seeing. How wrong we were. Coming back to the episode, I really loved many moments in this episode. I liked how Mason's theme was the Queen Mary's funeral theme, and to be honest, I actually feel kind of sad for Rudolph Diesel. The entire third season humanizes him so much that you actually feel sorry for him. Overall, this episode was a great finale for the season and was also a great turning point to lead up to season 4. Speaking of which, number 7, Chilling Point. This is the first of the many season 4 episodes that will be appearing on this list. The episode Chilling Point, in my opinion, was a very clever way to take on the story of Donald and Douglas. I really liked how cleverly the episode had been made as a remake of The Deputation. Much like the original version, Percy begs Phil to let Donald and Douglas stay. But after the small talk from Michelle to have more authority as a controller, Phil very coldly refuses to let Donald and Douglas stay. An interesting thing is that later on, Michelle says that Phil spends way too much time with the railway and forgets the family. While technically, Michelle was the one who made him be like that. So yeah, Michelle is kind of a hypocrite. Anyway, I also really liked the narration done by Kikray in this episode, and the ending in which Donald and Douglas return to Scotland makes me actually feel sorry for them, as they both were probably cut up and scrapped. Or maybe they were preserved on some railway, who knows. This episode also helped a lot in the character development of Phil, which I also really liked. Overall, a very good episode and a very good retelling of the original version. Number 6, Fortunate Son. This episode was a fantastic opening to season 4B. Before the episode properly gets into gear and gets dark, it starts out with a kind of light-hearted tone to it. In this episode, we are also introduced to Stanley Ardman, who in my opinion is one of the most tragic characters in the whole series. He's a young boy who hates going on outings with his father and does not want to be a controller, but wants to live his life like a normal kid. Anne Ardman is also introduced in this episode. But in my opinion, Robert Stewart just simply steals the entire episode. He's one of my favorite characters in the second half. His character, his dialogue, his humor and his voice acting by Enterprising was also very well done. His character is just so wonderful. He has a sort of charm to him that makes you want to spend more time with him. And by the end, when Phil refuses to let him visit his own niece and nephew, you actually feel really sad for him. Even though I will agree Phil kind of does have a point, since Robert almost got them killed. This episode overall is just a very fun watch, which you will enjoy a lot. Number 5, Mid-Soda. This episode is by far the most darkest episode in the mostly light-hearted Season 4A. Mid-Soda has one of the most well-written plots in the entire series. To reveal that Smudger was just an engine who had problems which he couldn't help is kind of depressing to think about actually. This episode makes you feel a lot more sorry for Smudger. Duke here also has some amazing character development in this episode. We see how with his aged wisdom now, he very much regrets the actions he had done in the past when he was more younger. It is revealed that Duke was the one who suggested to turn Smudger into a generator, which resulted in the mines getting flooded as Smudger didn't function properly. So Duke was indirectly kind of responsible for the closure of the Mid-Soda railway. And the scene with Smudger? My god! I never thought I would see anything like this. These very few lines said by Smudger are one of the best lines of the entire series. And if you're asking how does it end? Well, how do you expect a Thomas story to end? It ends with Sir Handel, Peter, Sam and Duke assisting Smudger in suicide. Great! However, on a brighter note, we also get Robert's line, which balances out the episode's doom and gloom setting. This episode also has hands down the best visuals, in my opinion. I like how Turtles made the choice to film these scenes mostly outside, as it makes the episode feel even more grander. This was one of the most tragic episodes, which had an amazing story and amazing scenery. Authority. This episode was a fantastic end to the first half of Sudrian Conflict. Each and every storyline that begins from the first season gets wrapped up beautifully in this episode. Simon's character ends very tragically, and I would be lying if I said that his death didn't make me feel sad. Despite his somewhat bloodthirsty sociopathic behavior. And then we have probably one of the most saddest scenes of all, Diesel's sacrifice. What was done with Diesel here was probably one of the best things that could be done with Diesel in general. From the first season, it is established how Diesel is an engine with many dreams, which are more often than not crushed by the other steam engines, especially James. And despite the last thing anyone said to him being,
"Nobody wants you here, so you should just leave. Now, go, leave. No one wants you here. Get out, go."
he still was ready to sacrifice himself for the others. That scene of him charging at the bomb is probably one of the most beautiful things in Thomas fan projects till date. Now that is how you pull off a character arc. This episode had also introduced Robert Stewart. While he's still kind of not the same guy from season 3 and 4, we see how he's an army general, and I do like how it is made that the army general voiced by E93 is Robert. And yes, the Mr. M plot twist was not seen coming by many people, including me. Also, the end of this episode kind of in some ways brings the whole thing full circle, as this is how the first episode had begun. And honestly speaking, if no season 3 and 4 were made, this could have also sufficed as a pretty good ending to the series. And unlike the actual ending, it would have been a kind of happy ending. So yeah, great episode. Number 3, In Other Words. This episode had in my opinion the best opening and closing scenes. The opening scene is just beautifully shot and edited, and it's just overall magnificent as we follow Hugo for the mission, which ends with the plot point of the missile being placed at Coldy Fell. The closing scene is also a beautiful montage on how the island and its people are changing as Phil starts to turn more corrupt, with a beautiful flute song in the background. The scene is also shot and edited beautifully. The episode also shows how Phil is getting more and more paranoid as he puts up security cameras all around Sodor, which makes everyone uncomfortable. Even as a workman arrested for an honest mistake which he thought was an attempted murder. One thing I didn't get is that why did Alan decide to help out Phil and put his own life in danger? Phil did everything to him that anything bad could be done to him. But despite that small thing, this episode was just a masterpiece which was beautifully shot and edited. Number 2, Runaway. This is the episode that amazingly builds up the finale. After Stanley goes missing, Phil and Robert reconcile and decide to do this together. This is also, I think, the only episode where I have no sympathy for Phil at one moment, and then Phil earns that sympathy back a few minutes later. In the beginning of the episode, Phil orders Scar Lowe to remain in the scrapyard before he requests a new number 1. And surprisingly after this, we never see Scar Lowe again. So I think we all have to just hope he wasn't scrapped. That scene made me really hate Phil for how insensitive he is. But then we come to the beach scene, one of the most well acted out scenes for the entire series. Phil realizes what a piece of crap he has been and then just breaks down, after which he promises to become a better father, a better husband, and a better friend, which makes the next episode even more tragic. The beach scene alone makes this one of the show's best episodes, and the moment in which he walks into a security room and gets knocked out by Mason, that's when we all realize that the finale of the series was going to be something big. This episode had one of the most beautiful acting and beautiful settings. Overall, this is one of the best. Number 1, Sins. I think everyone expected this to come out on top, and whoever thought it is very much correct. This was a tragic yet a perfect end to the entire series. Phil spends the majority of the episode completely helpless and is at the mercy of Stephen Hatt, and is also forced to watch his son and his best friend be murdered in front of him. It also showed Stan Lee as a very tragic character. He just wanted to live a normal life, but ended up having to live with too many privileges. But because of the family he was born in, was kidnapped, tortured, and then shot dead. Basically, the most miserable life anyone could ask for. And very shortly after Stanley's death, we also see Robert die as well. I also really love the scene at Barron Park where Mason kills everyone. It has some beautiful music and Mason's death was shown beautifully. And most, if not all the storylines, end very tragically. Phil's story ends with seeing almost everyone he loves die before being stabbed to death. Thomas and Ryan's story ends with Thomas sacrificing himself to kill Diesel 10, and Robert's story ends with him finding out his military base was an evil base and gets to see all his fellow mates blow up and then finally gets shot in the head. The final scene with Anne visiting Phil and Robert's grave was just heartbreaking, and I also really love the music that plays during that scene. One complaint I will say is that the end cover was not really needed, but okay, sure. And the Soda nuclear war things just felt a bit lazy in my opinion. But overall, this episode was a masterpiece and was a perfect end to such an awesome and tragic series. You know, while I was rewatching some of the episodes for this video, I realized something. The entirety of Sudrian Conflict was nothing more than a tragedy. Everyone's deaths, everyone's character arc, and the overall story's end. It was all just heartbreaking to watch. Everyone's deaths, everyone's character arc, and the overall story ends very tragically. It was all just heartbreaking to watch. These many characters just ending like this was also very sad. So Mr. Turtle, if you by any chance are watching this, I want to say thank you. Thank you for this amazing series that started off good and ended off absolutely spectacularly. And you have inspired a lot of people to make their own series like this. So yeah, thank you for this spectacular series that you call Sudrian Conflict.